and being tempted by those things that are good and wonderful, but need to be disciplined for the purpose of the well-being of society. And the well-being of society says there's a time and place for these things, and we generally know when that is.
Then we have Eve with a capital E, higher spiritual soul self, calling man to spiritual meeting and purpose. And then we have Eve with a lowercase e, the comely woman, the symbol of temptation, beautiful, abused and misused by man's erring perception of her.
The real purpose of the relationship between a man and a woman is a very high and noble purpose, to set the foundation for human society by the unity and love that they work with each other, and that they create a family that is, shall we say, ahead of the game. And then there's those who see Eve as symbolizing, and throughout the Bible, the female is used often as a symbol of temptation or worldliness, but not because she's that way, but that's how man has reduced her to an object of his passions, of his lowest nature. In this case, the animal nature appears, or the reptilian takes over, because, and of course the man would use the excuse, but she's so cute. But that's not an excuse. All the more reason we should be careful what we do.
Then we find the Garden of Eden, the paradise of childhood, a natural paradise where man lives harmoniously with an all-providing nature. It also represents the evolutionary stage and non-reflective life.
A child gets up in the morning, doesn't need to reflect on where he's going to get his next meal. It's provided for him. He doesn't have to worry about his bed, etc., in most normal cases. Obviously, we've created a society that doesn't always meet these challenges, and that's one of the challenges that we are capable of meeting today, is that no child should go without the basics of life, including the love of the adult world. And that's one of the reasons today we are challenged to change the world, because it doesn't have to be the way it is today.
The banishment from Eden represents leaving natural childhood and entering choice-challenged adolescence, where choices between good and evil must be made.
Where choices between what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's good for humanity, what's actually injures humanity. Those are the choices that today our young people have to make. Are they going to choose a life of destructive behavior? Are they going to choose a life where lust rules reason and purpose? These are the challenges our young people need to be aware of. It starts very young, and we have to meet the challenge early so that we can eventually, with patience, find the person that we want to spend our life through eternity with, and bond with that person. And in that wonderful matrix of love and compassion, passion becomes an instrument of joy. And that which was considered suspect behavior becomes a joyful, wondrous, celebrated by all.
I'd like to ask a question related to the earlier discussion of what's absolute within, I guess, the different revelations. It seems to me that here we're talking of good and evil, and that oftentimes people of conviction use that directive to be single-minded and apply it to the notions of what's good and what's evil. So suddenly they're single-minded about what's good and evil. So can you just relate for the audience good and evil as related to absoluteness and relativity?
Okay, well, first of all, the single-minded devotion, and that's the key word, devotion, is to the source, towards God, towards His messenger. Then, from there, you approach it in the context of that revelation. Now, in the revelation of Baha'u'llah for today, we don't see things in any absolutes. Everything is relative. At the same time, we practice obedience to the directives of God with a, you might say, sense of absolute correct. We want to do it right. So that we understand that when God says that sex outside of marriage is not to be done, that there will be consequences of such behavior. It's not good for the advancement of society. Therefore, restrain your reptilian self and harness it so that it's released when there's commitment, commitment to God, commitment to each other, and commitment to creating beauty in the world. And then everything becomes blessed. Now, when we say evil, we're saying this: anything where we take a lesser truth and elevate it above spiritual truth is a form of evil. But there are degrees of evil. That's why no absolutes. There are degrees of evil, and we know that. It's just like murder. There's degrees of murder, and there's degrees of wrongdoing. And what we just have to realize, though, that basically, to be in harmony with the will of God brings joys and blessings. To be out of harmony with the will of God, as God has expressed it in a revelation from Him, is to bring sadness, discouragement, weakness, and frailty of the soul. We don't want those things. We want to have... So there's an advantage to seeking to do what we believe God would have us do from the source. And but that's not something we go around and making judgment of others. That's another thing. This is about our own personal decision making. We're not to go around and start pointing out other people's frailties. We're to set the example. And when we do that, there will be plenty of opportunity to help people see more clearly the advantage of doing things God's way. It has great advantages.
So now we'll continue on to the tree of knowledge, which represents patiently obeying God and choosing to relate to a woman as a person, as a wife with passion for purpose and meaning. Sex becomes a bond and a joy. It becomes the means of bringing forth a child who will know God.
Basically, the reason I use the term patiently, there's a time and place for it. Not just because you want to do it, but because it's a part of your commitment to God, that it has its place in His plan that makes it beautiful and joyous. And then there's the other eating of the tree.
So then we have the second tree of knowledge with a lowercase t, which represents impatiently falling to passion as the adolescent self becomes tempted, symbolized by sex for gratification only, and becomes passionately attached to the things of this world.
In other words, the eating of the tree in this case happens to be the sexual act done without the right motivation. But it's a symbol of all things that are of this world. Men's lustful attitude towards women is also their lustful attitude towards money, towards power, and has been the corrupting influence in our lives. And in this case, when we talk about man, we're talking about mankind. This can be a woman doing exactly the same thing. The idea being, mankind was symbolically used. The woman was a symbol of the higher soul self that wanted to do the same thing that the reptilian wanted to do. It wasn't that she was wrong. It's that she wants to do it, though, in the right way. He wants to do it any way it's being done. And unfortunately, the story goes that it shows the two ways it's done, and what happens. You produce this character who has been a lot of pain to the world versus the one who's going to be a lot of joy to the world, the person of the covenant.
We then have the tree of life, which represents patiently understanding that development of the united family, the spiritual family, is the foundation of the future world civilization. In other words, bringing forth a new race of men.